Hello again. I mentioned this morning that some of the most authoritative critical race theorists, together with quite a few other idealists, and also of course the Black Lives Matter movement, have suggested that removing the police might be a good idea and lead to more peaceful solutions to problems. In other words, some of these people see the police as being the problem for society, and that once it's removed, things will become a lot more peaceful and easygoing. I thought it might be interesting to have a quick look at how this has worked out over the last 50 years or so in Europe and North America. We begin with the Montreal police strike in Canada in 1969. Canada is not some wild Middle Eastern country where people are in the habit of running wild and behaving like savages. What harm could possibly result if the police simply withdrew for a few hours from a Canadian city? Surely everything would go on pretty much as usual. On October the 7th, 1969, the police in Montreal went on strike, closing all the police stations and simply refusing to go on patrol. The police pulled out at 8 a.m. and within a couple of hours the first bank had been robbed. Another half dozen banks were also to be robbed that day. The looting of shops began as soon as the police were off the streets, and some of the looted properties were also set on fire. Some angry taxi drivers in Montreal had decided this was a perfect chance to put out of business a limousine company, which had a monopoly on picking up fares from the airport. So a mob of discontented taxi drivers attacked the garage of the company, called Murray Hill, with Molotov cocktails. Security guards there responded by firing 12-bore shotguns at the attackers, some of whom fired back with weapons of their own. A sniper then opened fire from a rooftop. 4 buses were set on fire, and after the mob had left the Murray Hill garage, they rampaged through the centre of Montreal, looting and burning at will. Hotels, restaurants and shops all had their windows smashed. A burglar was shot dead when he broke into a doctor's home because the doctor decided there was no point waiting for anybody to help him. By dusk, millions of dollars worth of damage had been done. 30 people had been shot and 1 person killed. The rioting and disorder was only brought to a halt when the government ordered the army to restore order. Welcome to the wonderful world of cities without police officers on patrol. It took less than 12 hours for a civilised city of the Western world to collapse into barbarism in the absence of the police. I give links in the description to this video for those who want more information about the things about which I'm talking. One is reminded irresistibly of what Thomas Hobbes said about the situation when there is no government to force people to behave properly. The life of man, nasty, brutish and short. The difficulty is that many of those advocating the abolition of the police are too young to have seen the terrible things which happen when there's no government in control and no police to maintain order. A few years after the Montreal police strike, well, actually, this situation began that very year in 1969. The United Kingdom had its own experience of a society where the community dealt with law and order rather than the police. Between late 1969 and summer of 1972, parts of the northern Irish cities of Belfast and Londonderry were declared no-go areas for the police. Barricades were erected at the entrances to these districts, and armed guards operated checkpoints to prevent the police from entering. The Irish Republican Army, a paramilitary militia, took over responsibility for enforcing order. This was done in the most brutal way imaginable. Women who violated the accepted codes of conduct had their heads shaved and were sometimes tarred and feathered. Youths who misbehaved were beaten with baseball bats or pick handles, sometimes resulting in broken bones. More serious adult offenders, thieves, drug dealers and so on, were kneecapped, that is to say shot in the knees. This ended with some of them being crippled for life. Anybody suspected of being in contact with the police was liable to summary execution, being shot in the head. It was vigilante justice of the worst kind, and only possible because the police had withdrawn from the area. More recently, we saw a similar state of affairs in the American city of Seattle. A no-go area was established which covered a few city blocks, and barricades were erected to stop the police from entering the zone. This was known as the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. It lasted for about 3 weeks in June 2020. The police station in that district had been under siege as part of the Black Lives Matter disorders, and the decision was made to evacuate it and leave the people living there to run their own law and order. The chief of police in Seattle said this was an effort to de-escalate the situation and rebuild trust. The worst thing you can do when threatened with mob rule is, of course, to give in to the mob's demands, and the next few weeks showed why this is the case. On June the 20th, 2 people were shot. The police tried to get to the victims, but were prevented by the barricades and crowds. The 19-year-old black man, Horace Lorenzo Anderson, was killed in one shooting. Another black man was injured by gunfire. The following day, there was more shooting. The police chief who had withdrawn forces from the area, Carmen Best, realised she had made a dreadful mistake. She said that day, "Groups of individuals engaging in shootings, rape, assault, burglary, arson and property destruction. I cannot stand by not another second and watch another black man, or anyone really, die in our streets, while police aggressively thwart the efforts of police and other first responders from rescuing them." The next day there was another shooting, and then on the 29th a 16-year-old boy who was black was killed by gunfire. A 14-year-old black teenager was seriously wounded at the same time. That night a gun battle erupted with 30 shots being fired. These are just 3 instances of what happens when the police leave and communities have to fend for themselves. History teaches us that it always ends in violence. Such experiments have never yet been conducted except to the sound of shooting. When next you hear talk of defunding the police, it is worth bearing this in mind. It always ends in gunfire.